Slog FPV. About a month and a half ago, I ordered the Flywoo 1S Nano Baby. It's a 40mm quad, and as far as the props, the receiver I went with was the Express LRS receiver, and it's set in the box for probably at least 3 weeks or so. Then I finally decided to pull it out and set it up, and it was, in my humble opinion, not ready for prime time. The version 1.0 of this wasn't set up correctly. They had RPM filtering enabled, but didn't have the motor pole set up. They had it like for 14 poles when it should have been set up for 12. And then in the filter tab, they didn't really have it configured correctly for RPM filtering. Then also the tune itself was not that great, and there were some other issues. So I think the normally Flywoo is really good about setting up the quads to where it's a good experience for a new pilot, but in this case they really missed the mark. I did notice that they did come out with a version 1.2, which actually has a different connector. It has the instead of a PH 2.0 connector, they went with the GNB connector, which actually is a better connector because you don't get as much voltage drop. But the other thing they did, they actually came out with a better tune, and RPM filtering was set up correctly. So in this video, I'm just going to show you how to quickly go out to the Flywoo website and download the version 1.2 PIDs, basically the CLI Dump, and then also they have a hex file for upgrading the flight controller firmware. So I think if you have one of these, the version 1, you're probably want to go out, and I'll show you how to do that, and upgrade it to the latest factory settings as far as the CLI Dump, and then also the firmware version that they used on the 1.2 version. So hopefully if you're ordering this, you're ordering the 1.2, but if you're like me and you have the older version, this will help you get started and have a better user experience. And then I'll go through some tips and my thoughts on this quad.
Okay, where we're going to go next is to the Flywoo website, and I'll link that below. But there is a support tab. You're going to want to select that. Underneath that, there's CLI for bind and flies, and then they have a selection for CLI for FireFly 1S Nano Baby Quad Series. You need to pick the CLI dump that corresponds to the baby quad that you have. I happen to have the Express LRS. If you have TBS Crossfire, you're going to use that dump. So you would select that one. They also have an FR Sky version and then the plug and play version. But before we screen scrape the CLI, we're going to go ahead and download the firmware, which is Betaflight 4.2.9. So this is a CLI dump and the firmware that they have for the latest version of the 1S Baby Quad or FireFly. And so you want to save that into a directory that you can find so you can load it via the Betaflight configurator, and I'll show you how to do that next. So you're just going to want to click on that, and then you can download it. Moving on to updating the firmware, you're going to go ahead and plug the FireFly in, and you're going to go ahead and hit update. And then instead of loading the firmware from online, you're going to go ahead and load it from local here in the bottom right hand corner. And you're going to go ahead and select the file folder that you copied your hex firmware file to, and then you're going to do open and then flash firmware. I've already done this, so I'm not going to repeat the process. Now that you've updated the firmware, you're going to go back to the Flywoo web page, and you're going to go ahead and click on the CLI dump. In my case, again, it was the Express LRS TBS Crossfire CLI diff file. So, and it's going to pull up a screen, and so you're going to just do a screen scrape. I would do it from the resources on. So you're just going to do a copy to the bottom. I'm not going to do the save because I've already done this. So just do a Control C, and then you're going to go back to the Betaflight configurator. Now that we're back in the Betaflight configurator, we're going to go ahead and connect and go to the CLI, and you're just going to do a Control V if you're on a Windows machine, and you'll notice, and then hit return. And so basically you're just copying the screen scrape that you just did, and then you type in save, and then it'll go ahead and save those changes, and now you're done. So next what we'll go through is the changes I made from this updated factory CLI diff that we've just saved. So moving on to the changes I made from the factory default settings for the updated version. I would always recommend calibrating the accelerometer. Didn't make any changes on the ports tab. In the configuration page, they actually did a good job of setting the maximum arm angle to 180. On the V1 version of the config file, they had this set at 20. So they did that correctly. I did change the craft name, put that in. Another thing, although they're hard to hear, the D-shot beacon on motors this small, but it's better than nothing. I go ahead and set up RX lost and RX set. Just turn that on so that I can use the D-shot beacon of the motor. One thing I would recommend is changing the power and battery voltage settings. Here I move that down. Since I have a PH 2.0 connector, there's going to be more of a voltage drop over the version 1.2, which has the GNB connector, and you don't get quite as much voltage drop. So I drop this down, minimum cell voltage of 3.1, maximum cell voltage I bump that up to 4.4 because I'm going to be charging to high volt, and then the warning cell voltage, I don't like it flashing in my face all the time, so I set that down to 3.2. Didn't do anything in the failsafe tab. So moving on to the PID page, PID tuning, they actually put a good tune on this now. That's why I highly recommend that you upgrade to this config file, because on the version 1 they just used the Betaflight defaults and RPM filtering wasn't set up correctly. They actually put a good tune on the version 1.2, and it works fine on the 1.0. But you can see here the RPM filtering changes that they did are good for that setup. So I did put my rates on. I don't like the Betaflight defaults. These are my rates. Moving on to the modes. They only used aux2, but I like to have a separate switch for ARM and then my modes. And this is more of a standardized setup, and this is typically how I set up most all my quads. I mean, I did put a beeper on aux4, and I always have air mode on a switch. So anyways, on aux4. All right, I should say air mode on aux2. Okay, and then going adjustments, I do have a rate profile where I have 3 rates. So that's on aux3. You don't need to do that, but that's just what I do. And I did make some changes in the OSD. It was, they didn't have it really set up to where, it was kind of messy. So I just rearranged it. You can rearrange it however you want to, but this just happens to be the way I arranged it. It is nice that they actually did show the RSSI dBm value. They did configure this thing correctly, so you got a good value there. So on the first version, version 1 config, they didn't have it set up correctly, and so this is important for Express LRS. So that's nice that you don't have to mess with that. And so that's it. And I'll go ahead and cut and paste my CLI dump. Hopefully I have to kind of trim it down so that it doesn't exceed the max characters, but I'll put my CLI dump for what I did.
So if you have the version 1, these are the things I would highly recommend that you do as tips. The first being is, and the version 1.2, is to make sure that you put a little bit of shrink tubing on the VTX antenna. This thin wire here gets easily chopped off. This just gives it a little more protection. Doesn't really hurt the signal significantly at all, probably not even measurable. And just makes it so that when you're flipping over and crashes and stuff, you're not gonna break that thin wire as far as the antenna wire there. Then also, I would recommend wrapping the motors with acetate tape. Link below from Amazon. I do that on all my little quads, nano quads. I did notice without the tape, the motor wire started flopping up and definitely could potentially get caught in the props. So I would do that. And then of course, if you have the 1.0 version, you absolutely need to upgrade to the 1.2 PIDs and tune that they have that I already showed you. And then also I have a lot of batteries that have the PH2.0, so you know, I'm gonna be wearing those out first before I upgrade, but I would highly recommend if you have the version 1.0 that you go ahead and upgrade it to the new connector, the new G&B connector, because there's much less voltage drop. And actually, when you get a pack of batteries from G&B, they actually, in a lot of cases, include a new pigtail. So would recommend that you upgrade it when you feel like you know, you've thrown away quite a few of your older PH2.0 connectors. I'm just not going to spend the time to hack off the connectors, because I also use these batteries on some of my other quads. So this isn't a how-to video on setting up Express LRS. Go to YouTube, search on Express LRS, and there's all kinds of tutorials on how to do that. I'm just going to show you how to bind up this little nano quad up quickly in Express LRS. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug in a 1S battery and plug it in 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And it, see if you look here, let me see if I can get you to, you can see the little light underneath here now is flashing blue and it's in bind mode. I'm going to go ahead and execute my Lua script, and we're going to go ahead and bind. As you can see, I have good signal. Next, I'm going to show you some flight footage with some light freestyle and more of exploratory type flying that this little nano quad does great at. So what are my final thoughts on the Flywoo FireFly Baby Nano? I think that the 1.0 version wasn't ready for prime time. They really should have delayed the launch, because they came out with a version 1.2 just about a month later. So obviously they felt like there were some deficiencies there. And you know, it has the better connector on there, but that's an easy upgrade. But the main thing was it just wasn't a good experience out of the box, because the configuration and the tune itself was just not there. But that's easy to fix, as you saw from my video. But once you get the firmware updated, I really like this little guy. I think the flight times are great. You get about 5.5 to 6 minutes of flight time with a mix of freestyle and just cruising around. I would say that this is more suited towards somebody that just likes cruising. It's okay at doing acro, but not the best as far as a 1S nano quad. I do have some that are better at that, but as far as cruising, I definitely feel like this is a fun little quad if you're just going out and exploring, and a little bit of light nano acro freestyle. It'll do it. It just doesn't have a lot of power. So overall, I think the tune was great as far as smoothness once you use the 1.2 tune. I definitely love the Express LRS receiver on this thing. I always dislike the fact on the SPI receivers on these little nano quads that are FrSky D8, the fact that the VTXs have like at 250 milliwatts have greater range than the control link, and that's backwards. The control link always needs to be more stable, and you can go out further distance than what the video feed has. So I love it that my at 200 milliwatts that you can start getting breakup, and you start enough to turn around then, and you always have the comfort level that, hey, my control link is can go well beyond that range. So I really like Express LRS in that regard. And I think it's definitely going to be taking over the FrSky D8. A lot of the little nano flight controllers are now coming out with an integrated Express LRS. So I definitely do think that's the wave of the future on these little nano quads. So overall, I would say definitely pick up the 1.2 over the 1.0. And even the 1.0, once you make the mods that I described, I definitely give this little guy thumbs up. So with that, thanks for watching my channel.